Barry Gibb, born on September 1, 1946 in Douglas, Isle of Man, was raised in a working-class family that frequently relocated. His early years were marked by a sense of instability as his family moved from Manchester to Redcliffe, Queensland, Australia. But it was here that Barry's musical destiny began to take shape. Growing up with his brothers Maurice and Robin, Barry developed a near telepathic connection with them when it came to music. Their shared passion for songwriting and harmony laid the foundation for what would become one of the most iconic musical groups of all time, the Bee Gees. From a young age, Barry demonstrated exceptional talent in creating melodies which would eventually propel the Bee Gees to global superstardom. His ability to craft emotionally resonant songs would later define his career and become an influential force in the music industry. The rise of the Bee Gees and disco dominance. Chatti e Ur ini. In the 1970s, the Bee Gees, led by Barry Gibb, became synonymous with the rise of disco music. Barry's falsetto voice, along with his extraordinary songwriting, was the driving force behind the group's success. Songs like Stayin' Alive, How Deep Is Your Love, and Night Fever became anthems of the era, dominating the charts and defining the soundtrack of the 1970s. These songs, not only musically innovative but also emotionally charged, captured the spirit of a generation. Barry's ability to blend pop with deeper emotional and social themes resonated with millions worldwide. His falsetto became an iconic sound, marking the Bee Gees' place in music history. Their contribution to the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, which sold over 40 million copies, solidified their status as global superstars. Barry's creative genius was central to their meteoric rise, and his influence extended beyond the Bee Gees' hits. Barry Gibb's legacy as a songwriter and producer. Barry Gibb's talent extended far beyond his work with the Bee Gees. He became a sought-after songwriter and producer, writing hits for a diverse range of artists. His songwriting abilities were not limited to one genre. He wrote for artists across pop, soul, and country music. Hits like Woman in Love for Barbra Streisand, Islands in the Stream for Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers, and Heartbreaker for Dionne Warwick showcase Barry's versatility. His ability to craft timeless melodies in a matter of hours, infused with deep emotional resonance, became his trademark. Barry's work ethic and relentless pursuit of perfection were crucial in maintaining the Bee Gees' relevance through multiple musical eras. As the principal songwriter and arranger for the Bee Gees, he not only shaped their sound, but also influenced countless artists who came after him. His legacy as a master of melody and songcraft is undeniable. Tragedy and loss, the deaths of Barry's brothers. Throughout Barry Gibb's illustrious career, personal tragedy has left a profound mark on his life. The deaths of his brothers, Andy, Maurice, and Robin, left Barry as the last surviving Gibb brother. Their deaths deeply affected him, and the grief was something that stayed with him for years. Andy, his younger brother, passed away in 1988, followed by Maurice in 2003 and Robin in 2012. Losing his brothers with whom he had created so much musical magic was an unimaginable blow. Barry has spoken candidly about the sorrow of outliving them and the emotional weight of being the last one standing. However, rather than retreating into silence, Barry has continued to perform and record music, honoring their memory with each note. His solo album, In the Now, 2016, showcased a more introspective side of his artistry and allowed him to process his emotions, reflecting on both the joy and pain of his journey. Barry Gibb's connection to his roots and legacy. Despite spending most of his life in the United States, Barry Gibb has maintained strong ties to his native Isle of Man and his adopted home of Australia. In 2009, he and Linda became naturalized citizens of the United States, but they chose to retain their British citizenship, honoring both their American and British roots. Barry's connection to his homeland is further reflected in his purchase of the former home of country legends Johnny Cash and June Carter. Cash in Hendersonville, Tennessee. He envisioned transforming the property into a creative retreat for artists, a place where music history could be honored. Unfortunately, in 2007, the property was destroyed in a fire, dashing Barry's plans. Despite this setback, Barry continued to embrace his creative pursuits and remained dedicated to his family. He and Linda eventually sold the property in 2014, marking the end of an era, but Barry's love for music and his family remained unwavering. Barry Gibb's reflections on John Lennon. At 78, Barry Gibb has begun to reflect openly on his relationships with other music legends, particularly John Lennon of the Beatles. For decades, fans and historians have wondered about the nature of the relationship between the Bee Gees and the Beatles. Barry has now shared his personal thoughts on John Lennon, revealing that his admiration for Lennon began long before they ever met. As a teenager in the early 1960s, Barry was deeply influenced by the Beatles' revolutionary sound. It wasn't just their melodies that captivated him. It was Lennon's fearless innovation and social impact. Barry viewed Lennon as a symbol of artistic freedom and change, and his music had a profound influence on him. First encounters with John Lennon. Barry's first encounter with John Lennon took place in the late 1960s at a music industry party in London. Barry recalled feeling nervous as Lennon walked into the room with an undeniable presence that commanded attention. What struck Barry most was Lennon's sharp intellect and surprisingly warm, humorous demeanor. Despite his public image as a defiant figure, Lennon was known for his kindness and thoughtfulness in private. Barry remembers Lennon complimenting the Bee Gees on their vocal harmonies, calling them beautifully strange, a comment that stayed with him for years. Barry's memories of Lennon were not just of a rock icon, but of a man who, despite his public persona, had a quiet, introspective side. Barry's thoughts on Lennon's legacy. As the Bee Gees' success soared in the 1970s, Barry often wondered what Lennon thought of their musical transformation. Disco music, which dominated the charts, was often dismissed by critics, but Barry always believed that Lennon, as a fellow innovator, would respect their ability to evolve. In later interviews with Lennon's friends and associates, Barry learned that Lennon had privately admired the Bee Gees' songwriting, particularly their ability to craft songs that connected deeply with audiences. However, Barry acknowledged that Lennon's relationship with the Bee Gees was complicated. Lennon had, at times, made dismissive comments about the Bee Gees' music, which hurt Barry. Yet, over time, Barry came to understand that Lennon's sarcasm and biting wit were often shields against his own internal struggles. The impact of Lennon's death on Barry Gibb. The news of John Lennon's tragic death in December 1980 hit Barry hard. He recalled being in a Miami studio when he learned of the murder, and it felt like the world had stopped. For Barry, Lennon's death was not just the loss of a peer, it was the loss of a cultural icon who had influenced millions with his music and message. Barry admitted that he cried that night, mourning not only Lennon's family but also the countless fans who had looked to him for hope and inspiration. Lennon's death was a profound moment for Barry, and it marked the end of an era for a generation that had grown up listening to his revolutionary music. Barry Gibb's final thoughts on John Lennon. In his later years, Barry Gibb has come to view John Lennon not as a mythic figure, but as a real person, flawed, brilliant, and deeply human. Barry expressed his deep admiration for Lennon's brilliance and acknowledged that Lennon had challenged the world to think more deeply and to feel more deeply. For Barry, Lennon's brutal honesty inspired him to embrace a more authentic approach to music. He realized that the Bee Gees' music had to be real and meaningful to him first, rather than trying to please everyone. In sharing his reflections on John Lennon, Barry has offered a heartfelt tribute to a man who, despite his struggles, changed the world with his music and message.